AITA. I decided to host Thanksgiving night, not allowing my husband's friend bring his dog. She didn't listen to me and the hosting went crazy. Alright, buckle up, folks. This one's a doozy, and honestly, I'm still reeling from how everything went down. Let me start by saying that Thanksgiving is usually not something we host. My husband and I live in a pretty small apartment. Think, cozy but crowded with more than 4 people, kind of small. Plus, we don't have dedicated guest parking, which is already a nightmare when friends come over. For these reasons, we've never really done big gatherings here, but this year, my husband was really excited about the idea of hosting. Now, I'm not completely against the idea of hosting, it's just that the logistics can get tricky. We used to host a lot of parties and get-togethers at our old place, which was bigger and more accommodating, and I'll admit, it was fun. I miss those days. So when my husband suggested hosting Thanksgiving this year, I figured, why not? He seemed so thrilled about it, and it felt like a way to bring back some of that old magic. Most of our guests are friends rather than family, so it's not the most traditional Thanksgiving setup, but it's always been a good time. To make things easier and avoid the kind of stress that comes from single-handedly pulling off a Thanksgiving feast, we decided to go with a potluck-style dinner. Everyone agreed to bring a dish, and honestly, I was so relieved. The idea of juggling a turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and all the sides in our tiny, galley-style kitchen was enough to give me heart palpitations. Not to mention, we have limited counter space, so even trying to prep more than one dish at a time feels like a game of culinary Tetris. Having everyone contribute a dish felt like the only way to make this work without completely losing my sanity. One of our friends, let's call her Chelsea, immediately volunteered to make the turkey. It was like the Thanksgiving gods had smiled upon us because there was no way I was going to attempt something that big in my oven, which honestly struggles to bake cookies evenly. I've never roasted a turkey in my life, and the thought of potentially screwing it up in front of everyone was just, no. Chelsea, on the other hand, is known in our group for her cooking skills. She's that friend who brings perfectly plated dishes to potlucks and somehow makes it all look effortless. Her turkeys, in particular, are legendary. They're always golden brown, juicy, and seasoned to perfection. I mean, people actually rave about them weeks later. So when she offered, it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Turkey. Check. Crisis averted. Fast forward to Thanksgiving Day, and I was running around like a maniac trying to get everything ready. I'm talking full-on panic mode, shoving random clutter into closets, cramming coats and bags into the laundry room, and desperately trying to make our cramped little apartment look presentable. You know when you start cleaning one area, and suddenly you notice 5 other things that need to be fixed. That was me. Every smudge on the walls, every stray sock under the couch, I saw it all, and it was driving me nuts. My strategy basically boiled down to shoving anything remotely messy out of sight and praying no one opened the wrong door. To top it off, we don't have a dishwasher, so I was already fighting a losing battle with the sink, which was practically overflowing with last night's dinner dishes. I lit every candle I owned to mask the faint smell of whatever had been lurking in the drain, and by some miracle, the place started to look halfway decent. My husband was in a great mood the whole time, bless him. He was bustling around, vacuuming, tidying up, and texting friends to confirm their arrival times. It felt like a team effort, and for a brief moment, I thought, okay, maybe this won't be so bad. That's when we got a text from one of his friends, let's call her Emily, asking if she could bring her cat. Now, don't get me wrong, I love animals. I'm the kind of person who stops to pet dogs on the street and watches cat videos to unwind. But my immediate reaction was, absolutely not. First of all, our apartment was already going to be packed. We were squeezing 10 people into a space that feels tight with more than 4, so adding a cat to the mix. Hard pass. Secondly, it was a dinner gathering. I just couldn't imagine how comfortable it would be for the cat to be surrounded by loud voices, clinking dishes, and people bustling around. And let's not forget the logistics. Where was the cat going to hang out? On the table? Underfoot while we're serving food? It just didn't make sense. So I politely told Emily that pets weren't allowed, explaining that our space was small and not really pet-friendly for an event like this. To her credit, Emily was super understanding. She immediately said, "No problem," and mentioned she'd make other arrangements for her cat. I breathed a sigh of relief. Crisis averted, or so I thought. It was one of those moments where you think, great, one less thing to worry about. If only I'd known what was coming next. But then my husband brought up a potential issue. He reminded me that Chelsea has a dog. And not just any dog, a medium-sized, very excitable dog that she brings everywhere. Like, if you've met Chelsea, you've probably met her dog within 5 minutes. It's her whole personality. Now, I have no problem with people loving their pets. I think it's great when people treat animals like family. But there's a time and a place, and I didn't think our tiny apartment during a crowded Thanksgiving dinner was it. My husband suggested we give Chelsea a heads up about the no pet rule, just in case she was planning to bring her dog. I agreed, even though I had this sinking feeling about how it might go. See, Chelsea has a bit of a history with this kind of thing. There have been a few events in the past where she wasn't allowed to bring her dog, and it caused some, let's say, tension. But I figured we'd be fine as long as we were polite about it. So my husband texted Chelsea, asking if she was planning to bring her dog and gently explaining that, unfortunately, we couldn't accommodate pets for this particular gathering. He kept it short and polite, straight to the point. To be honest, I could tell he wasn't thrilled about sending the message, but I figured it would be less awkward coming from him since they've been friends for longer. I even offered to step in and make the call myself if he wanted me to, but he assured me he could handle it. I didn't press the issue, though in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that this conversation might not go as smoothly as I hoped. A little while later, Chelsea called him instead of texting back. My husband, looking a little uneasy, decided to put her on speaker so we could both be part of the conversation. From the moment she spoke, I could feel the tension building. Her tone wasn't friendly or neutral, it was clipped and had this underlying edge of irritation, like she was already bracing for a fight. She didn't even ease into the call with pleasantries or small talk. Her first words were, "You know, I always bring my dog everywhere," and the way she said it wasn't a casual observation. It sounded more like a challenge, like she was daring us to contradict her. I'll admit, I was taken aback. I wasn't expecting her to be thrilled about the no pet rule, but I also didn't anticipate this immediate level of resistance. My husband looked at me, wide-eyed, as if to say, "What now?" I took a deep breath and decided to step in, thinking maybe I could smooth things over. Trying to keep my tone calm and friendly, I said something along the lines of, "Well, that's not entirely true, right? I mean, there have been events where you didn't bring your dog. And honestly, that is true. We've been to barbecues, birthdays, and even a game night where her dog wasn't present." I thought I was just stating a fact, something neutral to steer the conversation away from the defensive tone it was heading toward. Apparently, that was a mistake. My comment landed like a lead balloon. There was this brief pause, just long enough for me to realize I might have hit a nerve, before Chelsea fired back, "Well, why didn't you tell me this before you invited me?" Her voice had this sharpness now, like she was truly offended, and I could feel the atmosphere shift from tense to downright uncomfortable. My husband stayed quiet, probably sensing this was quickly escalating into a situation he didn't want to get tangled up in. I tried to explain myself, still keeping my voice as calm as possible, though I could feel my heart starting to race. "Honestly, Chelsea, it didn't even occur to me to mention it," I said, carefully choosing my words. "I just assumed it wouldn't be an issue since this is a formal dinner. It's not really common for people to bring pets to something like this unless it's discussed beforehand. And, you know, we don't have pets ourselves, so we're just not set up for it." I thought I was being reasonable, logical, even. In my mind, it's not typical to assume you can bring your dog to a dinner party without asking first. But Chelsea wasn't buying it. Her response came quick and sharp. "Well, I guess you'll have Thanksgiving without a turkey then." The way she said it was so matter-of-fact, like she was throwing down a gauntlet. For a second, I didn't even know how to react. Was she serious? It felt like she was holding the turkey hostage over the fact that she couldn't bring her dog. My mind was racing, trying to process how we'd gone from a simple boundary about pets to what felt like an ultimatum. At this point, I was floored. It felt like she was trying to pressure me into letting her bring the dog by holding the turkey hostage. I don't like being pressured, especially in my own home, so I calmly responded, "I'm sorry you feel that way." And then, before I could say anything else, she interrupted me and said, "No, I feel sorry for you, since you won't have a turkey," and hung up on me. My husband looked equally shocked. I mean, who does that? Who weaponizes Thanksgiving dinner over a dog? In the end, one of our other friends offered to pick up a pre-cooked turkey on the way over, so we will have turkey for Thanksgiving. So, Reddit, AITA for setting a no-pet boundary? Or should I have just let her bring the dog to keep the peace? Update 1. Hello, I have an update for you on this crazy story. The events that followed turned what was supposed to be a joyful Thanksgiving gathering into the most surreal, chaotic, and frankly, unbelievable dinner party I've ever experienced. I still can't decide whether to laugh about it or write it off as a cautionary tale for future hosting. Thanksgiving Day started off hectic but promising. As expected, the apartment was tight with the number of people we invited, but the energy was so positive that it made up for the lack of space. Everyone arrived on time, dishes in hand, and there was this immediate warmth in the air. My husband and I greeted each guest at the door, thanking them for their contributions. The spread started coming together beautifully: casseroles, stuffing, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, pies, you name it. And, as planned, one of our friends came through with a perfectly cooked pre-made turkey, which they picked up that morning. It was beautiful, golden brown, and smelled absolutely divine. I almost wanted to cry with gratitude when I saw it. The table was set, and although we had to cram chairs together and improvise with stools and even a step ladder for seating, no one seemed to mind. There was laughter and chatter as everyone settled in. It was one of those moments where you look around and think, okay, maybe this is what the holidays are really about. People were passing dishes around, pouring wine, and exchanging stories. Sure, it was a little tight, but the camaraderie more than made up for it. Then, just as we were starting to dig into the food, there was a knock at the door. My stomach dropped because, let's be real, I wasn't expecting Chelsea to show up. After our awkward phone call and her dramatic proclamation about the turkey, I had assumed she wasn't coming. Part of me was relieved about that because I didn't want any drama, but another part of me felt a twinge of guilt. Maybe I should have followed up or tried harder to smooth things over. Still, I never imagined she'd actually show up after the way things were left. I excused myself from the table, still basking in the warmth of conversation and clinking glasses, and made my way to the door, half expecting to find someone who had forgotten which apartment they were supposed to visit. But when I opened it, I was met with the last thing I ever anticipated: Chelsea, standing there with an almost casual expression on her face, holding her dog's leash. Except it wasn't even just a leash. It was one of those extendable ones that practically scream, "I didn't plan to follow any rules today." And she wasn't holding a turkey. Not even a side dish or a dessert. Nope, just her dog, who was wagging its tail enthusiastically, its whole body vibrating with excitement as though this was the most natural scene in the world. I froze, my brain scrambling to reconcile the blatant audacity of what I was seeing with the festive, wholesome atmosphere we had just created inside. For a split second, I wondered if I was imagining things. Maybe this was some sort of stress-induced hallucination brought on by the chaos of hosting. But no, there she was, in the flesh, with her very real dog. The sight was so absurd that I couldn't even speak at first. The energy inside, warm and bustling with friends passing food and sharing stories, felt like it belonged to another universe entirely compared to what was now standing at my door. Finally, I managed to stammer out some sort of greeting, though it probably sounded more like a question than a welcome. "Chelsea," I said, the disbelief evident in my tone. My eyes flicked down to the dog, which was already straining at the leash, eager to explore. The sheer gall of it left me momentarily paralyzed. I reminded her, as calmly as I could muster, that I had explicitly said no pets. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I felt the need to reiterate the boundary I had made abundantly clear earlier in the week. Surely there was some misunderstanding, I thought. Maybe she'd brought the dog for a quick hello and planned to leave it in the car while she joined us inside. But Chelsea didn't seem the least bit fazed. If anything, she exuded this air of confidence that suggested she wasn't even remotely concerned with what I had just said. She gave me this almost breezy look, as if to say, "Oh, don't be silly." Before I could finish speaking, she stepped past me with an ease that left no room for argument, her dog trotting alongside her like it had just been granted VIP access. It was like she had decided that this was her space, her party, and I was just a minor inconvenience in her way. I stood there, stunned, watching her march straight into the apartment without so much as a glance back at me. My protests felt like they evaporated in the air between us as she waltzed in, her dog's nails clicking against the hardwood floor. The dog immediately began sniffing everything, chairs, the carpet, people's legs, even the table where the food was laid out. Meanwhile, Chelsea zeroed in on one of the last available seats at the crowded table and plopped herself down, seamlessly inserting herself into the conversation like nothing was out of the ordinary. It was as if she had done this 100 times before, as if the rules everyone else had followed simply didn't apply to her. And then it hit me, she hadn't brought the turkey. Not a single dish, not a bottle of wine, not even a store-bought pie. She showed up empty-handed, completely unbothered by the fact that she had volunteered to provide the literal centerpiece of the meal. And yet, there she was, helping herself to the food that everyone else had worked so hard to prepare, acting as if she was entitled to be there. For a few moments, I was so floored by the audacity of it all that I couldn't even find the words to respond. The dog, meanwhile, was making itself at home, wagging its tail as it explored every corner of the apartment. It sniffed at guests' shoes, nudged its nose into bags left by the door, and even attempted to jump up onto one of the dining chairs. As the meal went on, Chelsea continued to act like everything was perfectly normal, as though nothing about her presence or her dog's antics warranted even the slightest acknowledgement. She sat comfortably in her seat, chatting with the person next to her and laughing at stories like she was the life of the party. Meanwhile, she had piled her plate high with food that everyone else had lovingly prepared and brought, and acted like it was her divine right to enjoy it without question. And then, as if her casual entitlement wasn't enough, she started feeding her dog directly from her plate. At first, it was subtle, just a small piece of turkey slipped under the table. But it quickly escalated. A generous scoop of mashed potatoes, a chunk of roasted vegetables, even a piece of someone's homemade stuffing, she didn't discriminate. And the worst part? She wasn't even trying to hide it. She leaned back in her chair, one hand on her fork and the other casually dangling scraps of food down to her dog, who sat obediently by her side, tail wagging, eagerly devouring every morsel she offered. It wasn't just brazen, it was downright disrespectful. The rest of us exchanged glances across the table, wide-eyed and unsure of how to react. It was the kind of situation where you're so caught off guard that you keep thinking, surely she'll stop any second now. But she didn't. She just kept going, chatting away and occasionally tossing another scrap to her dog, completely oblivious, or worse, completely unconcerned, with the growing tension in the room. It felt like we were all collectively holding our breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to say something, but no one did. Maybe it was politeness, maybe it was shock, or maybe it was a mix of both. Either way, the silence only made her behavior stand out more. And then, as if to add insult to injury, Chelsea turned her attention to the turkey sitting proudly in the middle of the table. It was a stunning centerpiece, golden and perfectly roasted, surrounded by sprigs of fresh herbs. It was the kind of turkey that people photograph before carving. My friend had gone out of her way to bring it, and it had become the centerpiece of the meal in every sense. Chelsea, however, fixed it with this judgmental, almost disdainful look before making some snide remark about how it wasn't her turkey. She said something along the lines of how she wouldn't waste her turkey on us because we hadn't bothered to call her back and ask her to bring it. The sheer audacity of that statement left me reeling. Waste her turkey on us? As if we were supposed to beg her to honor the commitment she had made in the first place. The entitlement was staggering, and I could feel the frustration bubbling up inside me, threatening to spill over. But I bit my tongue, unwilling to ruin the evening for everyone else. And then, as if the situation couldn't get any worse, the unthinkable happened. Chelsea's dog, who had been sitting by her side like a perfectly trained accomplice, suddenly leapt up onto the table. Yes, you read that right, onto the table. It was so sudden and so shocking that no one had time to react. Plates rattled, glasses wobbled, and the dog's nails clicked against the surface as it stood there, sniffing at the dishes spread out before it. The entire room froze, mouths agape, as though we were collectively witnessing some kind of surreal nightmare. It was like a slow-motion train wreck. The dog's nose twitched as it zeroed in on the turkey, and before anyone could move, it lunged forward, grabbed a chunk of the turkey in its mouth, and jumped back down onto the floor, taking its prize with it. The room erupted into chaos. People gasped and pushed back their chairs, some trying to salvage the dishes closest to them while others simply sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. The beautiful turkey, the one my friend had so generously brought to save the day, was now missing a significant portion, and the dog was happily chomping away at its prize on the floor, completely oblivious to the outrage it had caused. Chelsea, however, didn't seem the least bit fazed. If anything, she looked amused. She actually smiled, this smug little smirk, and made some ridiculous comment about how even her dog was outraged that it wasn't her turkey on the table. It was so absurd, so completely out of line, that for a moment, no one even knew how to respond. The audacity of it all was beyond anything I had ever experienced. That was the breaking point for me. I couldn't believe the level of disrespect, bringing a dog when I had clearly said no, not bringing the turkey she had promised, feeding her dog from the table, and now this? I wasn't about to let her ruin the evening any further. I stood up, pointed to the door, and told her she needed to leave. She tried to protest, but I wasn't having it. I ushered her and her dog out of the apartment, ignoring her indignant comments all the way to the door. Once she was gone, the atmosphere in the room shifted. People were still a bit stunned, but then the laughter started. It was the kind of laughter you get when something so absurd happens that you don't know what else to do. We salvaged the rest of the evening, though the turkey was a bit worse for wear thanks to the dog. Everyone agreed that it was a Thanksgiving to remember, though definitely not for the reasons I had hoped. I'm still in disbelief over Chelsea's behavior. But if nothing else, I learned an important lesson: set boundaries, and if someone refuses to respect them, don't feel bad about enforcing them. Even on Thanksgiving. Update 2. The day after Thanksgiving, sometime around mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced at it, expecting something innocuous, maybe a Black Friday deal or a message from one of the friends who had been at dinner. Instead, it was a text from Chelsea. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, bracing myself for whatever absurdity was about to unfold. And let me tell you, I was not prepared for what I saw. The message was long, almost essay-like, and started off with this tone that felt bizarrely self-righteous. She didn't apologize for her behavior the night before, nor did she acknowledge how her actions had disrupted the dinner. Instead, she doubled down on her position in a way that was so absurd, I had to read it twice just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding her. According to Chelsea, I was the one who had been in the wrong, apparently for failing to make accommodations for her dog. Yes, you read that right. She told me, in no uncertain terms, that if I didn't want her dog eating from the table, I should have provided a separate menu for him. She went on to explain that her dog eats with her at home and that it's a perfectly normal, acceptable thing to do. To her, the idea that I hadn't anticipated this and prepared accordingly was, apparently, a major oversight on my part. The tone of the message was dripping with condescension, as though I had committed some grave faux pas by not creating a fine dining experience for her dog. I could hardly believe what I was reading. A separate menu for her dog? At Thanksgiving dinner? In my tiny apartment? The sheer entitlement was almost comical. Almost. What really got me was the way she framed it, as though I had been the unreasonable one. She actually had the nerve to suggest that my lack of preparation for her dog was the root of the problem, that if I had just made a plate for him, none of the chaos would have occurred. It wasn't her fault for bringing the dog uninvited. It wasn't her fault for feeding him scraps from the table or letting him steal the turkey. No, the fault lay squarely on my shoulders for failing to treat her dog like a guest of honor. The absurdity of the message hit me like a ton of bricks. I stared at my phone, my jaw practically on the floor, as I scrolled through her lengthy diatribe. She even went so far as to offer me tips on how to be a better host in the future, advice that included things like keeping water bowls on hand for pets and being more understanding of different lifestyles. It was so ridiculous that I almost didn't know how to respond. Almost. After a moment of stunned silence, I couldn't help myself. I burst out laughing. I quickly composed a response, keeping it short and to the point. I didn't want to get dragged into a back-and-forth argument with someone who was clearly living in their own alternate reality. Instead, I sent her a series of laughing emojis and let her know, in no uncertain terms, that her behavior was nothing short of complete absurdity. The message wasn't mean or aggressive, it was more like a simple statement of fact. If she couldn't see how ridiculous she had been, that wasn't my problem to fix. Some people are just impossible to reason with, and Chelsea, clearly, was one of those people. I had done everything I could to set boundaries, and if she wanted to twist that into some kind of personal slight against her and her dog, that was on her, not me. Later, as I recounted the story to a few close friends, their reactions ranged from disbelief to outright laughter. In the end, I realized that Chelsea's actions said far more about her than they did about me. If she wanted to live in a world where her dog was treated like royalty and everyone else was expected to cater to her whims, that was her prerogative. But in my home, at my dinner table, I wasn't about to let her or anyone else dictate the rules. Thanksgiving might have been a bit chaotic, but at least it gave me a story I'll be telling for years to come.